I went camping last fall by myself. I'd done solo trips before, nothing crazy, just 2 or 3 days at a time. I liked the peace, the time alone, the way the woods felt different when it was just me out there. I planned this trip for weeks, picked a spot in a national forest about 4 hours from home, packed all my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, stove, first aid, everything. I was careful with gear, careful with plans, always told someone where I was going. The drive out was quiet. I remember how the highway stretched for miles, the trees on both sides starting to show fall colors, the sky pale and cold, looking even though it wasn't quite winter yet. I reached the trailhead by late morning, parked the car, slung on my pack, and started hiking. The trail was familiar. I'd been here once before, but never alone. It followed a narrow path through tall pines, then up toward a ridge. I wanted to camp up on the ridge, where the view stretched out over the trees. There was a small clearing up there, just enough space for a tent. The air smelled sharp with pine and cold dirt. Birds moved in the branches overhead. I hiked steadily, stopping only for water, feeling the weight of my pack settle on my shoulders. By afternoon, I reached the top. The ridge looked out over miles of forest. I could see the tops of trees rolling like green waves, with small breaks here and there where the land dipped or a creek ran through. I set up camp, pitched the tent, unpacked some food. The air was cool and dry. It was one of those perfect, crisp fall days where everything feels sharper, more real. As I sat eating, I noticed movement down the slope, near some bushes. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a coyote, but when I looked closer, I realized it was a mountain lion. It was maybe 40 or 50 yards away, partly hidden by branches. My heart jumped, but I stayed still. I knew the rules. Don't run, don't crouch, make yourself look big if it notices you. But the lion wasn't looking at me. It was squatting. At first, I almost laughed. I know that sounds stupid, but there was something so bizarre about seeing such a big, powerful animal doing something so normal. Its face was kind of tense, like it was concentrating, a little like the funny cat face you see in memes. But the moment passed quick, and the humor drained away. I realized this wasn't a zoo or a video. This was real. I was sitting up on a ridge with nothing but a tent, and there was a mountain lion down the slope, maybe finishing its business, maybe getting ready to move. I stayed as still as I could, heart pounding. The lion finished, stood up, and slowly walked back into the trees. It didn't look my way, didn't sniff the air or pause. Just walked off, smooth and quiet, like a shadow moving through the brush. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I waited another hour before I moved, just sitting, listening, watching the slope. Nothing. No sounds, no movement. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside the tent made me flinch. Branches creaked in the wind. Small animals rustled in the leaves. I kept imagining the lion circling back, drawn by the smell of food or the warmth of a sleeping bag. The next morning, I packed up. I planned to stay 2 nights, but I didn't feel right. I kept thinking about the lion, about how close it had been. I kept imagining those powerful paws, the way it had blended into the trees. I started back down the trail. As I hiked, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Tracks. Big, round paw prints in the dirt, not fresh, but clear. They weren't where I'd seen the lion the day before. They were on the trail I was using now. I followed them with my eyes, seeing where they came out of the woods, crossed the path, and went back into the trees. I kept walking, more alert now, glancing left and right, listening hard. The forest felt heavier. Not loud, not filled with animal sounds, but quiet. That thick kind of quiet where you hear your own footsteps too clearly. An hour later, I stopped for water. I sat on a log, stretching my legs, trying to calm down. I told myself the tracks were old, that the lion had probably moved on. I was being cautious, maybe too cautious, but I'd rather be careful than risk something worse. I stood up, tightened my pack, and turned to keep going. That's when I saw it. Down the trail, maybe 50 yards back the way I'd come, something moved. I froze. For a second, I couldn't see clearly. Branches, shadows, sunlight cutting through the trees. But then I saw the shape, low, muscular, moving smoothly between the trees. It was the lion. It had circled around. I stood still, heart hammering. I remembered everything I'd ever read. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Don't crouch. Make yourself look big. Back away slowly. I raised my arms, made myself as large as I could, and took slow steps backward. The lion watched me. His head was low, tail flicking slightly. Didn't charge, didn't roar, just watched. Step by step, I backed away. The trail curved ahead, leading down toward the lower slopes. I kept backing up, eyes on the lion, trying to keep calm. My legs felt weak. My mouth was dry. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and fast. After what felt like forever, the lion turned slightly. Not away, not fully, but enough to break the stare. It looked toward the trees, then back at me, and then slowly it moved off the trail back into the woods. I waited. I waited until my legs hurt from standing still, until I was sure it was gone. Then I turned and walked. Not ran, walked, as fast as I could without panicking. Every few steps I looked back. Every few minutes I stopped to listen. The woods stayed quiet. No movement, no sound, just the wind in the trees and the distant rustle of small birds or squirrels. I hiked for hours. My legs ached, my back hurt, but I kept going. I didn't stop for lunch, didn't stop for water, just pushed on. When I finally saw the trailhead, the empty parking lot, and my car sitting there, I almost dropped to my knees. I fumbled with my keys, tossed my pack into the back seat, and sat behind the wheel, shaking. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, feeling the tension leave my body little by little. Driving home, I kept replaying everything in my head. The lion on the slope, the tracks on the trail, the shape watching me from the trees. I realized how close I'd been, how easily things could have gone another way. When I got home, I unpacked slowly, carefully. I cleaned my gear, checked my supplies, folded everything away. I sat down that night and thought hard about what had happened. It wasn't a story about bravery or about outsmarting nature. It was just luck, plain dumb luck. I'd seen a mountain lion in its own territory, alone with no backup, no one to help if things had gone bad. I learned something out there. Nature doesn't care if you're careful or experienced. Nature doesn't care if you've planned or prepared. It just is. You're the visitor. You're the small thing moving through a big, old world. I still go camping now. I still love the woods, the quiet, the smell of pine and earth. But I'm more cautious. I stick to areas with people nearby. I carry bear spray now, even where I think I won't need it. And every time I hear a rustle in the trees or see a shape in the distance, I remember that day on the ridge, the day I saw the mountain lion, and the way its face looked, just for a moment, so normal, so ordinary, doing something so simple. But behind that moment was the truth. I was lucky. Lucky to walk away. Lucky to go home. And next time, I might not be. It was about 25 years ago. I still remember it clearly, though a lot of things from back then have gotten hazy over the years. But this trip has stuck with me. We were camping in Cowlitz County, Washington. It wasn't my first time out there. My family loved the outdoors. We camped a lot, fished, hiked, cooked over open fires. It was the kind of thing that felt normal to us, a way to spend time together, get out of town, get some fresh air. On this trip, there were 4 of us. Me, my dad, and 2 others, relatives, though I honestly can't even remember if it was my uncle and cousin or 2 family friends. What I do remember is that it was supposed to be a fun, simple trip. Nothing complicated, just a few nights out in the woods, far from the road, far from noise and towns. We had picked a site we liked, a clearing near some trees, not too close to any trails, but not so deep in the woods that it was hard to get to. We set up 2 tents, gathered some firewood, made a little fire ring with rocks, and settled in. The first night was normal. We cooked hot dogs and beans over the fire, told a few stories, watched the stars come out. There was no moon that night, so the sky was pitch black except for the stars, and the woods around us were thick with shadows. But we weren't bothered. We were used to the dark, used to the sounds of the forest at night, the rustling of branches, the occasional snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl or the yip of a coyote. It was the second night when things got strange. We were sitting around the fire again after dinner. It was late, maybe 10 or 11 at night, and the fire was burning low. I had my flashlight, one of those old heavy ones with the big silver head, and I was idly shining it into the trees now and then. That's when I saw them. Two red points, reflecting back at me from the dark, high up among the trees. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I flicked the light away, then back again, and there they were, still unmoving, just two red glints staring back. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my back. They were higher than deer eyes should have been. I knew that much. Too high for a raccoon or coyote. Not the right color or height for an owl or other bird either. I didn't say anything to the others. Part of me felt like maybe I was just seeing things, maybe a trick of the light, maybe the way the beam hit a branch or something. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I just kept an eye on it, flicking the flashlight occasionally, noting that the eyes were still there, still watching. Then the rock started. At first, I thought it was just wood cracking in the fire. But no, I noticed small pebbles landing near the edge of the fire ring. Then little sticks. Nothing big, nothing heavy, but definitely being thrown one by one toward the fire. Not at us, but toward the center of camp. It was like something was testing, poking at the edges, seeing what would happen. The four of us looked around, shining flashlights into the dark, but we didn't see anything. And after a while, it stopped. No more sticks, no more pebbles, no more rustling. We waited a while longer, then decided to call it a night. I crawled into the tent I was sharing with my dad, rolled out my sleeping bag, and tried to settle in. But I'm a light sleeper, always have been. Every little sound kept my eyes half open. Every small creak or crunch outside kept me alert. Sometime around 5 a.m., I woke up fully. I didn't know why at first. It wasn't a loud noise that jolted me, it was just a feeling, a sense that something was nearby. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, slow, careful steps moving around outside the tent. Not animal steps. These were too heavy, too deliberate. And then the smell hit me. It's hard to describe it exactly. It was a mix of wet dog, rotting garbage, and something musky, almost like unwashed fur. It was strong enough to make my stomach turn. Strong enough that I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me and tried not to breathe too deeply. My dad was awake too. I could feel it, hear the small shifts as he turned his head, adjusted his blanket, held his breath. He was a light sleeper like me, and I knew he'd caught the same noises, the same stink. The footsteps circled the tent slowly. We lay there frozen, hearts pounding, every muscle tense. I remember staring up at the thin fabric of the tent ceiling, watching the faint outlines of shadows moving past. After what felt like forever, my dad suddenly shifted, sat up, and without warning banged the side of the tent hard with his fist. The sound made me jump, my heart nearly stopping. Whatever was out there bolted. I could hear the heavy thudding of something large running away, crashing through underbrush, snapping branches as it went. And then silence. We waited, breath held, ears straining. Nothing. Eventually, the sun started to rise. Light crept through the trees, pale and cold, pushing back the shadows. We got up, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside carefully. The camp looked normal, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But the air still held a faint trace of that horrible smell, just enough to make me wrinkle my nose. We checked the perimeter, looked for tracks, but the ground was hard and covered with pine needles, making it tough to see anything clear. By the time the others got up, we were mostly packed and ready to go. We didn't tell them everything. We just said we'd had a rough night, that we thought maybe a bear or something had come through. We didn't want to spook them, didn't want to turn it into something bigger in their heads. But my dad and I knew. We didn't know exactly what it was, but we knew it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't anything we'd seen before in those woods. Something had been watching us, testing us, moving through the trees, throwing things, waiting for a chance to get closer. And when it did, when it crept right up to the tent in the early dawn, it only ran when it knew we were awake, when it knew we were ready. That trip taught me something important. It reminded me that when you camp, you're never really alone. You're surrounded by life, animals, Birds, insects, sometimes even other people. You don't always know who or what is out there, watching from the dark. It made me more careful. After that, every time I went camping, I chose my sites more wisely. I kept food properly stored, avoided spots with too much cover around the edges, stayed alert late into the night. I started carrying better flashlights, made sure to keep bear spray or other protection nearby. It wasn't about being scared, it was about being smart, about understanding that the woods are wild, and sometimes the things out there aren't just harmless deer or curious raccoons. Sometimes you'll never know what was circling your camp at night, what was watching you from the trees, what was throwing sticks and rocks just to see how you'd react. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to pack up, leave, and count yourself lucky that all you got was a scare. To this day, I still camp. I still love the woods, but I never forget that night. Because once you've felt that cold shiver, once you've heard those footsteps, once you've smelled that awful stink drifting through the tent at dawn, you carry that memory with you every time you walk into the trees. And you never stop listening for the next set of footsteps, waiting just beyond the light. I had a rental car once, an old Kia Forte, I think. It wasn't a flashy car, nothing special, just one of those plain, basic sedans you get when you're in between vehicles or when your own car is in the shop. I had it because my old truck was getting repairs that were going to take a week. I remember being annoyed at first, wishing I had something better, maybe something more rugged, but when you're working with a tight budget, you take what you can get. That week, I went out to visit my brother. He lived not too far, maybe half an hour away, on the edge of a town that starts to blend into rural stretches, where the houses are spaced out more and the backyards seem to fade into open woods and fields. My mom lived nearby too, and their two backyards connected, though not in a straight line. You had to take a few narrow, winding turns between the trees to get from one property to the other. It was late in the day when I got there, close to dusk. The air felt cool and damp, the way it does after a recent rain. You could smell the wet leaves, the damp dirt, the faint scent of pine. My brother and I were just hanging out, talking about nothing, poking around the backyard, when we got this dumb idea. I honestly don't remember who suggested it first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was him, but one of us thought it would be funny, or exciting, or maybe just a way to pass time. To take the rental car off-road, through his backyard, across the narrow trails that led over to our mom's place. Now, I should say this was not a good idea. The Kia Forte is not built for off-roading. It's a small, low car, and the trails between the houses were barely more than rough tracks worn down by foot traffic, maybe the occasional ATV or dirt bike. The ground was uneven, a mix of mud, rocks, and patches of grass. But we were bored and it was a rental, so I shrugged, got behind the wheel and figured, why not? I eased the car down the slight slope of his backyard, feeling the tires bump gently over roots and dips. The headlights cut through the growing dark, casting bright beams across the trees ahead. My brother was in the passenger seat, shifting in his seat, half laughing, half nervous. We reached the first narrow path, squeezed between two large trees. I took it slow, easing the car forward, keeping the tires straight. The branches brushed against the sides, scratching lightly, but so far, so good. We made the first turn without too much trouble, rolling carefully over the packed dirt, the headlights flicking across the trees on either side. The second turn was tighter. I had to angle the car carefully, turning the wheel all the way, creeping forward inch by inch. We kept moving, deeper into the narrow space between the trees, following the faint marks of an old trail. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional creak of a branch or the soft sound of wind moving through the leaves. Then we rounded one last bend and I froze. There, directly ahead in the headlights, were eyes. Dozens of them. Rows and rows of glowing eyes, all at once. For a second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like running into a wall of tiny lights, all hovering just above the ground. My stomach clenched, my breath caught in my throat, my hands tightened on the wheel. My brother made a sharp noise beside me. Not words, just a sound of pure alarm. The car was still moving forward, not fast, but with enough weight and momentum that slamming the brakes didn't stop it instantly. We were rolling straight toward a herd of deer. As the headlights lit them up, I could see them clearly now, tall, pale shapes, long, thin legs, big dark eyes reflecting the light back at us. They stood frozen, packed together, staring at the oncoming car like they couldn't believe it was real. And then, all at once, they moved. It was like a switch flipped. The entire herd leapt into action, hoofs striking the dirt, bodies turning, scattering away from the path of the car. They bolted as a unit, darting off into the trees, vanishing into the dark. I jammed both feet on the brakes, heart hammering, stomach twisting, feeling the car shudder to a stop just where they'd been standing seconds ago. The sudden silence that followed was almost deafening. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breath coming fast and shallow, staring out the windshield. The woods were empty again, just trees and shadows, no sign of the herd that had just been there. I realized, slowly, that my hands were shaking. My whole body was tense, like every muscle had locked up. I forced myself to take a deep breath, then another. That could have gone so badly. If they hadn't moved in time, if I'd been going faster, if the ground had been more slippery or the brakes had failed, we could have hit them. And hitting one deer is bad enough. Hitting a whole herd? In a small rental car, in the middle of the woods, at night? It would have been a disaster. I sat there for a long minute, letting the fear drain out, letting the adrenaline settle. Then, cautiously, I eased the car forward again, keeping it at a crawl, barely moving, just inching along. The rest of the trip back to the house felt tense, like the woods were watching. Every shape in the dark looked like something. Every shadow felt like it was waiting to leap into the path. We finally made it back to the backyard, the faint glow of the house lights shining ahead. I parked the car carefully, killed the engine, and just sat there for a while, feeling my pulse still pounding in my neck and ears. Eventually, I got out, walked a few steps away, and just stood in the cool night air, trying to settle myself. My brother was pacing a little, shaking his head, occasionally letting out a sharp, nervous laugh, the kind you make when you know you were lucky, when you're trying to burn off leftover panic. That night, even after going inside, eating, sitting in the living room, trying to relax, I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, dozens and dozens of glowing eyes, lined up across the path, staring straight into the headlights. It's strange how clear certain moments stay in your mind, even long after they're over. I can still picture it now. The shapes, the eyes, the frozen moment before they fled. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about how fragile that situation was, how easily it could have gone wrong. A little more speed, a little less grip, a second's delay in their reaction, and I would have hit them. It reminded me that when we go into nature, when we take cars or bikes or even just our own feet into wild spaces, we're visitors. We're stepping into a place where other lives are moving, watching, surviving. We forget that sometimes, driving around in our steel shells, thinking we control the world around us. But out there, we're just another piece moving through a bigger, older system, one that doesn't care if we're startled or scared or if our plans go off track. That experience stayed with me. Later that year, when I went camping, I was more cautious. I paid attention to the space around me. Not just the weather or the gear, but the animals, the trails, the signs of life. I chose campsites carefully, far from obvious game paths or water sources, knowing that animals use those spaces too. I kept my headlamp ready, not just for my own sake, but to avoid startling anything. I stored my food properly, kept noise to a minimum, moved carefully at night. It wasn't about being scared, it was about respect. Respect for the fact that we share space, even when we think we're alone. Respect for the fact that the woods don't belong to us, and we're the ones passing through. That rental car, that stupid off-road drive, that moment of panic when dozens of deer scattered in front of me. It was a sharp, clear lesson, one I won't forget. And every time I go back into the woods, every time I hike or camp or even just wander down an old trail, I carry that memory with me. It's a reminder. Stay aware, stay cautious, stay humble, because you never know what's waiting just beyond the turn. I once rented a car for the weekend. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old Kia Forte. A little beat up, but it ran fine. My car was in the shop, and I had plans to visit my brother. He lived not too far, maybe 30 minutes away, in a semi-rural area, the kind of place where the backyards stretch into woods and fields, where you can't always tell where someone's property ends. I'd been to his place many times before, but this weekend was different. We were feeling restless, like we wanted to do something out of the ordinary, something dumb just for the thrill of it. After hanging out all afternoon, mostly eating junk food, watching random shows, talking about nothing, we got the idea to drive around his property. Now, you should know, his backyard connects to my mom's backyard, but it's not a straight shot. You have to make a couple of turns, follow narrow dirt paths that weave through trees and brush. It's not the kind of place you usually take a sedan, but we were both thinking, hey, it's a rental, why not? I remember the way the air felt that evening. Cool, damp, with the smell of wet earth. It had rained a few days earlier, so the ground was soft in places, packed and dry in others. The sun was already down, and the only light we had was from the car's headlights, casting long beams across the uneven ground. I slid behind the wheel, laughing nervously. My brother climbed into the passenger seat, slapping the dashboard and grinning. The car rumbled softly as I put it into drive, the tires crunching over leaves and small twigs. We pulled around the back of his house, heading toward the trees. First, it was fun, bumping along slowly, feeling the car rock slightly over little dips and roots. The headlights cut wide paths through the dark, lighting up the thick trunks and low-hanging branches. I kept it slow, maybe 5 or 10 miles per hour, weaving carefully between trees. The first turn was easy. We followed a narrow path lined with old tire tracks, a sign that people had driven this way before. Maybe on ATVs, maybe trucks, maybe just kids messing around. The second turn was a little tighter, but still manageable. I eased the car through, feeling the tires grip the soft dirt. Then, as we rounded the next bend, everything changed. In the beams of the headlights, maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead, were eyes. Dozens of them, glowing, unblinking, reflecting the light back at us. For a split second, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It was like a wall of little lights, flickering just above the ground. My stomach twisted, my hands clenched the steering wheel. We both screamed, not words, just sharp, panic sounds. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the ground was soft, slightly downhill. The car didn't stop, it just skidded, sliding forward. We were barreling straight toward a herd of deer. I could see them now, their shapes, their thin legs, their broad eyes. They weren't small, not the delicate little deer you sometimes see in parks. These were big, full-grown, clustered together, frozen in the headlights. Time felt strange in that moment. Everything was happening fast, but I remember every detail. The way the car lurched, the sound of gravel kicking up, the sharp smell of wet earth and exhaust, the terrified thumping of my heart. At the last possible second, the deer moved. Not just one or two, but all of them at once, like they were wired together. They bolted as a unit, flashing away from the car, hooves striking the ground, bodies darting into the trees. The car skidded to a halt just where they'd been standing. I sat there, chest heaving, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My brother was pale, eyes wide, staring out the windshield. We sat in silence for a long minute, just breathing. When I finally eased the car back into gear, I went slow. Slower than before, crawling along like a snail. My heart was still racing, my hands still shaking, but we needed to get back to the house. I wasn't about to leave the car stuck in the woods overnight. The rest of the drive was tense. Every shadow looked like movement. Every rustle sounded like more animals. My eyes darted left and right, scanning the trees, trying to spot anything before it leapt out. We finally made it back, the house lights glowing faintly ahead. I parked the car behind the house, turned off the engine, and just sat there. I could still feel the adrenaline buzzing in my arms, making me restless and jittery. My brother got out, pacing a little, shaking his head, letting out short, sharp laughs, the kind you make when you're trying to release tension. I sat in the driver's seat, replaying everything. It hit me hard just how bad it could have been. If the deer hadn't moved in time, if I'd been going just a little faster, if the ground had been a little wetter, the brakes a little worse, Could have hit them hard, maybe hurt myself, maybe totaled the car, maybe worse. But they ran. They all ran the opposite way, vanishing into the trees. That night, I barely slept. Even in the safety of the house, even after a shower, after eating, after trying to distract myself with TV, I kept seeing those eyes, rows and rows of glowing, reflected light, frozen in the beams of the car. I realized how easy it is to forget that the woods are alive, especially at night. We think of them as empty, dark places, but they're full, packed with creatures, big and small, all moving, watching, waiting. I returned the rental car the next day, a little muddy but intact. No scratches, no dents, no broken lights. But every time I sat behind the wheel, I felt a flicker of tension in my chest, a tightness in my hands. Took me a while to shake that feeling. Months later, when I went camping again, this time on foot, no cars, just me and a pack, I found myself more cautious. I set up camp far from animal trails, far from thick woods. I kept my headlamp close, double-checked the edges of the clearing before settling in. And every time the dark settled around me, every time I heard a rustle or a crack in the trees, I thought of those eyes. Not evil eyes, not magical or ghostly or anything like that. Just deer. Big, living, breathing deer, startled by the stupid noise of a car where no car should have been. It reminded me that when we go into the wild, we're visitors. Clumsy, noisy, often careless visitors, stepping into a world that doesn't revolve around us. That night in the Kia, barreling toward a herd of deer, was a sharp, clear reminder of that. Could have gone bad, fast, but it didn't. And I'm grateful. Grateful for quick instincts, there's not mine. Grateful for the way they moved, the way they escaped. Grateful that I got to go home, return a muddy rental, and laugh nervously about a story that could have ended a lot worse. And every time I step back into the woods now, I carry that lesson with me. Respect the space you're in. Stay alert, and never assume you're alone. That phrase ran through my mind as I sat by the campfire, stirring the embers with a long stick. I had said it earlier in a message to a friend, jokingly, thanking them for recommending this particular campsite. It was deep in the woods, a solid hour's drive from the nearest small town, up rough, winding roads that twisted through tall evergreens and thick underbrush. I'd wanted solitude, and I'd gotten it. I was camping solo this time, something I hadn't done in years. I used to go out alone a lot in my 20s, enjoying the silence, the space to think, the small challenge of setting up and maintaining camp without anyone else's help. But as I'd gotten older, I'd mostly gone on group trips or joined friends. This time, though, I wanted to get away, really away, and a solo trip seemed like the perfect way to do it. So here I was, a small clearing in the woods, barely wide enough for my one-person tent and a small fire ring. There was a little creek nearby, its gentle gurgle just barely audible through the trees. My rental car, a little sedan, nothing fancy, was parked about 50 yards away, up a slope where the ground was firmer. I had arrived late in the afternoon, set up camp, cooked a simple meal on my camp stove, and settled by the fire as dusk fell. The first night was peaceful. Cool air, a light breeze, the distant call of an owl or two. I read a bit by lantern light, sipped some water, stretched out in my sleeping bag, and drifted off. The second day was the same. I spent the morning hiking nearby trails, careful not to wander too far from camp. I wasn't interested in getting lost out here. The ground was soft underfoot, damp in some places from recent rain, and my boots left clear prints in the mud. I saw a few deer tracks, maybe some raccoon tracks, but otherwise it was just me and the trees. That night, though, was when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a sense, a tension in the air. The wind picked up slightly, rattling the branches above. The shadows seemed to stretch farther as the sun dipped behind the trees. I felt my skin prickle as I sat by the fire, stirring the coals, listening to the sounds of the woods. It wasn't just the usual forest noise. There was something else, a silence, a sudden, creeping hush that fell over everything, like the trees were holding their breath. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the shift of evening settling in. Maybe my own nerves playing tricks on me. I got into my tent, zipped myself in, and pulled the sleeping bag tight. I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint rustle of the wind, the occasional creak of branches. At some point in the night, I woke up. No loud noise, no nightmare. Just that same prickling sense that something wasn't quite right. I held still, eyes open, ears straining. Outside, the wind had stopped. The air was dead still. And then I heard it. Faint crunch. Footsteps. Not animal steps. Not the light scatter of a squirrel or the clumsy hop of a deer. These were slow, careful, deliberate steps. I froze in place, barely daring to breathe. The steps moved slowly around the tent, circling. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They paused on one side, then shifted, moving softly across the clearing. I felt sweat bead on my forehead, my palms damp inside the sleeping bag. I waited, counting seconds in my head, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Eventually, the steps faded away. Morning came slowly. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, the clearing looked normal, peaceful. The fire ring sat cold and gray. The woods stood quiet and green. But when I walked the perimeter, I noticed something strange. Tracks. Faint, but there, scuffed patches in the dirt, broken bits of leaf litter, small depressions in the soft ground. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe a hiker passing through in the night, though that seemed unlikely way out here. Maybe some animal I wasn't familiar with, though the tracks didn't look like any animal I knew. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking. The third night came. I built the fire higher this time, letting the flames crackle and dance, casting flickering light deep into the surrounding trees. I ate a cold dinner. I didn't feel like cooking, and sat by the fire, feeling the tension creep back in. Again, the woods seemed wrong, too quiet. I shined my flashlight into the trees, sweeping the beam back and forth. Branches, trunks, shadows, nothing else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I forced myself to stay by the fire as long as I could, waiting until the logs burned down to glowing embers before finally crawling into the tent. I zipped it up, pulled the sleeping bag around me, and lay wide awake, staring at the tent ceiling. Sometime in the early hours, I heard it again. Footsteps, soft, slow, circling. This time, they came closer. I could hear the faint rustle of something brushing against the tent wall, the barely audible sound of breath. Or maybe I imagined that part, I don't know. I stayed frozen, muscles locked, heart racing so hard I felt lightheaded. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. I lay there until dawn, waiting, listening, barely daring to blink. When the sun finally rose, I stumbled out of the tent, blinking in the pale light. The ground around the tent was marked. More faint tracks pressed into the dirt. Scuffs, depressions, traces. Someone or something had been circling the tent. I decided I was done. I packed up camp quickly, heart still pounding, nerves raw. I shoved everything into my pack, kicked dirt over the fire pit, and hiked up to the car. The road out was rough, the car bumping and rattling over potholes and rocks. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. When I finally reached the main road, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I drove straight back to town, heart slowly settling, the tension in my shoulders easing only once I was surrounded by buildings and people again. Looking back now, I can't say for sure what was out there. Maybe it was a person, a lost hiker, a hunter, a local wandering through the woods at night. Maybe it was some animal I didn't recognize, though I can't think of one that would move like that, circle a tent, press close without making a sound. Whatever it was, it reminded me of something important. The woods are beautiful. They're peaceful, calming, a place to escape and reset. But they're also wild. And when you're alone out there, far from anyone else, you're exposed. You don't always know who or what is moving through the trees just beyond the edge of your campfire light. You don't always know who's watching you from the dark. I still camp sometimes, but never alone. Not anymore, because once you've lain in a tent, heart racing, listening to slow, deliberate footsteps circling you in the night, you don't forget it. You carry it with you, Every time you zip up a tent. Every time you hear a branch snap just out of sight. Every time the night falls a little too quiet and you wonder who else might be out there. So, well, that is where I am now. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder, because now I know some lessons you only need to learn once. Okay, picturing that in my head is fucking hilarious. I remember thinking that earlier that afternoon when I first pulled into the campsite, laughing at myself, thinking how stupid I'd probably look to someone watching me struggle to back my car into a tight little patch of dirt between two big pine trees. I'd had to do a lot of back and forth, turning the steering wheel hard, adjusting and nudging into place. To anyone watching from the trees, I imagined it looked ridiculous. Me gritting my teeth, muttering under my breath, the little car inching back and forth over and over. But I was finally here, alone but here. I wanted this trip for a long time, just a few days away from work, away from people, out in the woods with no one to bug me. I picked a campsite that wasn't part of a big campground. It was a dispersed spot I'd found on a hiking forum, deep off an old logging road, surrounded by forest. I set up my small tent under the trees, got a little fire going in the stone ring, and sat down to take in the evening. It was late summer, so the sun stayed up a while, casting a golden light through the tall trees. The ground was soft with pine needles, and I could hear little scurrying noises now and then. Squirrels, I guessed, maybe chipmunks. The forest smelled like sap and dirt and old wood. I was relaxed. I made myself a simple dinner on the small camp stove, cleaned up carefully. I knew better than to leave food scraps around, and stretched out in a folding chair by the fire. As night came on, the woods got quieter. I noticed it slowly, the way the birdsong faded, the small animal noises seemed to stop, and even the breeze seemed to still. It wasn't anything sudden, just a slow hush settling over the trees. I poked at the fire, watched the flames dance, leaned back in my chair. It was dark now, the only light from the flickering fire and my small lantern set near the tent. When I finally turned in for the night, I zipped myself into the tent, crawled into my sleeping bag, and lay there in the darkness, listening. The woods creaked and shifted softly, but otherwise it was quiet. At some point during the night, I woke up. No loud sound, no sudden movement, just a feeling. I lay there, eyes open, straining to hear, and then I caught it. Faint shuffle, somewhere outside the tent, maybe near the trees. It was slow, deliberate, not the scatter of a squirrel or the hop of a rabbit. I held my breath, heart thumping. The shuffling sound circled slowly, then paused. I could hear the faintest sound of breathing, or maybe it was the wind, but it sounded too steady, too close. I stayed frozen, heart racing, palms sweating inside the sleeping bag. After what felt like forever, the noise faded. I must have eventually fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising. When I got out of the tent, everything looked normal. The fire pit was cold, the trees stood silent and still, and the car sat undisturbed in its little dirt patch. But when I walked the edge of the campsite, I noticed something. A scuff mark in the dirt, like something had been dragged. A faint depression in the pine needles, like someone or something had walked close to the tent. I brushed it off. Maybe I imagined it, maybe it was a raccoon or a deer. I tried not to overthink it. I spent the day hiking a nearby trail, enjoying the sunshine, the smell of the woods, the fresh air. I took my time, careful not to get too far from camp. When I got back that evening, I rebuilt the fire, cooked another meal, and tried to relax. But as the sun dipped again and the shadows lengthened, that uneasy feeling crept back in. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavy, like the trees were holding their breath. That night, I lay in the tent, wide awake, and again the sound came, soft, slow, circling. This time, I could hear the faint snap of a twig, the whisper of footsteps in the pine needles. Something was definitely out there. I clenched my fists inside the sleeping bag, heart hammering. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The steps came closer, pausing near the tent. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up, my skin prickling with cold sweat. And then, just like the night before, the sound slowly faded. Morning light never felt so good. When I got out, I checked the ground again. More scuff marks, more faint depressions, all around the tent. I knew it wasn't an animal now. Animals didn't move like that. Animals didn't circle a tent deliberately in the middle of the night. I made the decision then. I was leaving. I packed up camp quickly, heart pounding, eyes flicking to the tree line every few seconds. I loaded the gear into the car, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The old dirt road was rough, the car bouncing and jolting as I drove, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something step out onto the road behind me. But there was nothing, just the empty trees. When I finally reached the main road, I let out a shaky breath. Back in town, surrounded by buildings and people, I felt the tension slowly drain from my shoulders. Looking back, I still don't know what was out there. Maybe it was a person, maybe a drifter or someone living rough in the woods. Maybe they were curious, maybe they were watching. Or maybe it was something even simpler. Someone who didn't want me there, quietly making their presence known. Whatever it was, I learned something important on that trip. Camping alone sounds peaceful, sounds freeing, and sometimes it is. But when you're deep in the woods with no one else around, you're vulnerable. Every sound, every shadow, every small movement takes on a new weight. And once you've lain in a tent, heart racing, listening to footsteps slowly circling you in the dead of night, you don't forget that. You carry it with you. Every time you hear a twig snap in the dark, every time the wind brushes against the side of the tent, every time the night falls too quiet, and you wonder if you're really alone. So yeah, picturing that in my head later, safe at home, was fucking hilarious. But out there, in the dark, with no one else around, it was anything but funny. And that's why I don't camp solo anymore. We were camping in Washington, somewhere deep in the Cascades. I don't even remember exactly where. One of those rough, unofficial spots my buddy James found online. He loved these kinds of trips, getting away from people, finding places off the beaten path, places without marked trails or campground numbers. It was me, James, his cousin Matt, and our friend Steve. For guys, a couple tents, 2 cars, and a weekend to kill. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The spot was beautiful. Tall pines everywhere, soft ground covered with pine needles. A small clearing just big enough for 2 tents and a fire ring. There was a little stream not far away, which meant fresh water if we needed it. We set up camp, made a fire, and cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just hot dogs and canned beans. The air smelled sharp with pine and wood smoke. The first night was peaceful. We sat around the fire, drinking cheap beer, telling dumb stories, laughing at each other. The stars were so clear out there. No city lights, no noise except the wind in the trees and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. I slept hard that night, tucked into my sleeping bag, tired from the drive and the fresh air. The next day we went for a long hike. James led the way, pushing us hard. He always wanted to explore every side trail, every ridge. We were all sore and sweaty by the time we got back to camp. We ate again, sat by the fire again, and by late evening we were all beat. That's when the weird stuff started. At first it was just small noises, little thuds, faint cracks, something hitting the top of the cars parked nearby. We figured it was just wind knocking pine cones down. But as the night went on, the noises got more frequent, more deliberate. I remember sitting by the fire, hearing the distinct whack of something hitting the hood of James' old Jeep. Then another thud on the roof of Matt's car. We shined flashlights up into the trees, but saw nothing, just thick branches swaying in the dark. Then came the rain of pine cones. At first we laughed, we thought it was funny, some angry squirrel tossing stuff down at us. We made jokes, tried to spot it in the branches. But after a while, it got less funny. The pine cones were falling with real force, hitting hard enough to bounce off the metal roofs of the cars, landing with sharp cracks on the ground near us. We moved back from the cars, sat closer to the fire, figuring maybe the heat would keep whatever was up there away. But the sticks came next. Small ones at first, then longer, heavier ones tumbling down from the trees, some landing right near the fire, sending up sparks. We looked up again, but all we saw were branches. No rustling, no movement, no glowing eyes. It was weird, but we told ourselves it was just animals. Maybe a raccoon up there, maybe a squirrel, maybe even a bird knocking stuff loose. After a while, it stopped. We waited a bit, then shrugged it off and headed to bed. I'm a light sleeper, and that night I kept waking up. I'd hear faint tapping sounds, small thuds, something skittering on the tent. I told myself it was nothing, maybe pine needles falling, maybe wind. But at some point, I heard something heavier, a distinct shuffle near the tent. Footsteps, slow, soft, circling. I held my breath, heart pounding. Something brushed against the side of the tent. Just a faint scrape, but enough to freeze me in place. Then silence. I lay there, straining to hear, heart racing. After what felt like forever, the sounds faded, and I must have drifted off, exhausted. In the morning, the camp looked normal, mostly. There were a lot of pine cones and sticks scattered around, more than we remembered seeing before. Some were clearly fresh, their ends still damp where they'd snapped. But what really got me were the marks near the cars. Scratches on the hoods, faint but visible. Scuff marks on the ground nearby, like someone had been standing there, shifting their feet. We walked the edge of the clearing, looking for tracks. James found something, a partial footprint in the soft dirt. It was small, not an animal print, a human shoe, but none of us had been over there. We all looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. Someone had been near the camp. Someone had been in the trees, watching, tossing things down, maybe trying to mess with us. We packed up fast. The hike back to the cars was tense, everyone glancing over their shoulders, listening hard for any sounds in the woods. But we didn't see anyone. When we got back to the main road, I remember feeling this huge wave of relief. We drove back to town, mostly quiet, each of us lost in thought. Back home, I kept thinking about it. I went over it again and again in my head. Yeah, maybe it was a pissed-off squirrel at first, but squirrels don't make human footprints. Squirrels don't scratch car hoods. Squirrels don't circle tents in the dead of night. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted, but they were close. They were watching, and they wanted us to know. That trip stuck with me. Even now, when I go camping, I always double-check the perimeter. I pay attention to every sound, every shadow, because out in the woods, you're never as alone as you think you are.